The Irishman is directed by Martin Scorsese and stars some of the most iconic actors of our generations, which includes Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Joe Pesci, Roy Romano, and among others. And this is based on the book called "I Heard You Paint Houses" by Charles Brandt, and it tells the story of Frank Sheeran, who, as it's pretty much been established in real life, and also for those you don't know, he was pretty much the guy who gets involved with Jimmy Hoffa, and he basically it deals with his story about how he knew Jimmy Hoffa and his relationship building with him, and as a mobster. And it tells a story from basically when he's in current times, and it flashes back to when he started out in his early years, and it builds with his relationship dealing with his rise with the mob, and also eventually meeting Jimmy Hoffa, who's played by Al Pacino. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, believe it or not, this movie's went through development hell for quite a long time. This was actually a project that Scorsese went through for a while, because there was a time when after Casino came out that he wanted to work with Robert De Niro again, and I think it was they said it was about like 10 years ago that they came out with the script for it to try to tell this tale of this guy named Frank Sheeran, and they wanted to build a story around it. And this movie was in development for so long, and to the point that there was one particular actor that they wanted to pretty much get involved, who pretty much had a lot to pretty much dive in, because he was in retirement for a while, and that was Joe Pesci. And
Yeah, and not only that, it also uh, it they wanted to do this film because it's pretty much, if you I don't know if you guys heard, but Martin Scorsese pretty much announced that this would be the last time all these guys would be united with him. So this was a big project in the making, and like you said, it was going to. A lot of it had to do with money and what was going to cost to get Joe Pesci out of retirement. Um, but if you've followed all of Scorsese's films, or pretty much any gangster film he's ever done with these cast members, have been true stories, and this
yeah,
one's based off a true story.
yeah, and what I when I'm a big Martin Scorsese fan myself growing up, like I've enjoyed almost all his movies, including his like classics like Goodfellas, Casino, and even some of his other ones like The Departed, and even one like called Hugo. And the movie, this movie was got my interest the most, because I've always been a fan of both of these actors, Pacino, De Niro, and Joe Pesci. And pretty much when I heard that Joe Pesci was going to come out of retirement to do this movie, I couldn't be more excited, because for years, this is a man who went into retirement after the late '90s, and I can see why they took so long trying to get him back, because he only made like small
He's
appearances.
pretty much like he took the Daniel Day Lewis approach, where he'll go in a full blown retirement, but then will star in like, because I think I read somewhere where he did something 9 years ago. It was like the last project of anything he's ever done. Then he goes back in and hides. But after this film, he pretty much announced this is it for him.
Yeah, and the last two recent movies he did before this one was in 2006. As a favor, he starred in De Niro's The Good Shepherd, where he had a cameo, and then he did a favor for I believe it was for Meryl Streep, when he did that movie called the Love Ranch, which came out in 2010. So you can see that for a long time, it took him for a while to get involved with a movie like this. And believe it or not, like that was their biggest challenge, because besides Scorsese going through a lot of problems getting the movie pretty much distributed, because it was also the
Yeah,
problem getting Pesci on board, and that also factors in too,
yeah.
where
Now, like Martin Scorsese films, he's like one of my all time favorite directors, and the dude is like flawless in fucking writing. And I knew when this movie was finally being made, I I knew there's no doubt that this was not, this is definitely going to be good.
yeah. And when I started first seeing the trailers for it, I couldn't believe like how excited I was. But not only was I ready to see these guys come do what they're best with, but also the technology that they announced that they were going to use for them to make younger. at first from the trailers, it was kind of throwing me just a tiny bit off, but as I
Yeah,
watched the movie and after seeing it, I was actually fucking blown away by how great that the technology they used to make these guys look younger worked with it with the
yeah.
D8.
But yeah, upon seeing this film tonight, I've got to say that this is easily up there as some of his best movie he's ever done. I would still say like Goodfellas, Casino is a little bit up there, and Departed being another one, personal favorite of mine. But this is definitely up there as some of his best.
Yeah, it was for me too, and it's great to finally. It's great to always. It's great to see Scorsese go back to what he is really the like a master filmmaker with when it comes to gangster films, and this is what a
Yeah,
classic
gangster
tale.
films. Martin Scorsese is not only a talented writer, but the guy is, in my opinion, the best gangster filmmaker when it comes to mob movies, hands down.
Yes, yeah, and this is a very different type of mob movie on a different level, where while it's not like as like high phenomenal like the Goodfellas Casino are, it still tells a great fucking epic like it should for telling a tale like this, and it's a very different type of mob story that's more reserved, laid back, so to feel that
Yeah,
while it takes a lot of its time, it still builds a really great fucking story around it, and that's where
exactly. And in my pros, I mean, of course, everybody fucking did phenomenal. I mean, is there really going to be anybody out there that's going to doubt one of these actors? Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, among others, who's been in other gangster films that is still alive. You know, there's some that unfortunately I would love to see that passed away, but I mean, the cast is amazing.
yeah, and it's great to see De Niro doing like one of his best performances in years, especially him playing that uh especially playing a guy like this that's while he is a hard edge like hitman, he
Yeah,
still has a lot of qualities to him where he's still kind of like in a way you can see it where he kind of feels bad for what he does in some cases, but he
yeah.
does for a good cause, and that's what I love about De Niro's character and his performance in this. He shows a lot of range as of how much doing this type of job is like basically like he describes him doing orders like in the army basically.
Yeah, I would say that what I really appreciate, another pro I do have with this film, was if you guys remember Casino and Goodfellas, you always had Joe Pesci playing the guy who's the one out of control and ends up fucking everything up. This
Mm-hmm.
time they actually let Joe Pesci play more like the toned down, kind of in the middle guy. Not to mention he does call the main shots because he is a main leader. He's pretty much the boss, the head honcho, the boss. But
Yes.
this one have him more kind of like reasonable kind of guy, and it's a
Yeah.
little different take than usual. Which I actually glad they did that because, I mean, do you really need Joe Pesci to play the same guy every fucking movie?
No, that's what surprised me a lot, and I'm actually glad that Joe Pesci was playing a character very different from his other roles like this
Yeah,
because he's playing a very calm and reserved guy, which even though he has those kind of like that calm manners that you can reason with, he's still a guy that you definitely don't want to fuck with because he has such a
basically
performance.
his presence is there
Yeah,
and you fear it, but he doesn't have to be like he was in his other films. And if you're expecting to see Joe Pesci say a bunch of F words, it ain't happening in this film.
no,
He's a soft spoken guy.
yeah,
But
but
this
the
film
biggest
also, which I really liked, was how the movie was edited. It did confuse me at first, and I do recommend that if you do watch this film, you haven't yet, you have to pay attention because the slightest turnaround, you're like, what the fuck happened? Because
yeah.
there's a lot going on. Like he said earlier, there's three plots going on. We get an old Robert De Niro, like he's pretty much telling a story to somebody there, and he's really old, like he's on his pretty much on his deathbed. And then you start getting you get the main story, which you follow him where he's young and as he's rising up. That's
Mhm.
the main story. But then in between, you get this edited story where you see him, Joe Pesci, and these two girls riding together, and it seems like they're on their way to somewhere. But
Yeah.
it just pops in every now and then, which plays a key role. Which that made sense because whenever they tell the backstory, it leads to that. And the way it's edited, at first I was kind of worried, but then after like kind of like if you wait a little bit longer, it makes more sense. So you got
Yeah,
to give the film patience.
yeah,
And
I love the structure of it because and this is just a compliment because I like the way that it deals this. In a way, it's like almost Scorsese was taking some kind of like influence with taking some like kind of similar filmmaking techniques from Christopher Nolan's movies because Christopher Nolan's movies do that kind of thing where they have like flashbacks that like go forward and backwards and stuff. And
yeah,
I just like the way it's structured with that because pretty much it's like going forward and then going backwards again, but in a great way because it lets you know that it's not pretty much all over the place. It's very
yeah.
consistent, so to speak.
I'm kind of glad they do that because that just shows how good of a filmmaker and a writer Scorsese is because he doesn't need to go A B C D E F G. You know,
Right.
it's pretty much he can flush everything around and it edits perfectly. Another thing I got to praise, while this film is pretty much, and this is what I mean, and I'm going to criticize other directors on this. But one thing that I do appreciate was like when you watch this movie, there's pretty much like we get to see 30 to 40 or 50 years worth of time jumping.
Yeah.
And while this is going, of course, the actors are going to have to look de-aged. And I will say that the facial recognitions and the de-aging was probably some of the best I've ever seen in any film I've ever watched.
Yes.
Because a lot of times it's been done perfectly, not perfectly. It's been done good in some films, but a lot of times it's either fucking shitty or directors making excuses why they couldn't do it, like in Doctor Sleep, which I still love that movie, but I was a little disappointed we couldn't get Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall and some other key faces. I could get why he probably didn't do that, but at the same time, I hear the same excuse from directors saying, "Oh, it's not possible." Yeah, Scorsese showed you it is.
Yeah. I
So
mean, that's another thing. Yeah, I agree. Like the technology they use for it, I love the way that they are able to capture their faces and they put a lot of detailed work into making them look younger and stuff. There's maybe like a couple times, like at the beginning of the film, it took a while to kind of like it took just a tiny bit to kind of like get it used to the technology they were using for it. But after a while, I was on board. Like I had really no problem at all with it. I thought it really captured the way they looked in that time period, and you even get to see some of the emotional moments that kind of that capture it too that I enjoyed.
another thing I like to now this is like we were talking about speaking of different type of movie compared to Goodfellas and Casino. In those films, you guys will probably remember there was a lot of comedy, one slackstick, funny shit, especially from Joe Pesci himself, and of course brutality. In those both films were fucking crazy. This one's a little bit more lower toned. I guess we could have seen a little bit more, but I had no issue with it. And whenever it gets to the scenes that there are shootings and people getting their head shot, blown off, it's pretty fucking detailed. It looks like legitly, like if somebody walked up and put a gun to your fucking head and blew your fucking brains out, it looked real.
Yeah, it does, and it's a lot more. It's a lot more quieter film than compared to
Yeah, it
some
is a
other
very quiet
movies
film.
because it's very detailed into like the really a lot of build up involving the characters and stuff. And
Yeah.
when it does show the brutality, it doesn't do it like in the kind of like exaggerated way. Well, in the very cinematic way like the other two movies did. But when it happens, it looks pretty good. It looks very realistic, especially when you hear the sounds. Like it just comes out of fucking nowhere in some places, and I was like, damn.
The shots and the blood coming out of the head and dripping out, it looks fucking real. And that's another praise. And only Martin Scorsese can take a film like this. And I bitched all year with films where there's just nothing but talking, and I end up finding a lot of the films boring. Only Scorsese can fucking make a 3.5 hour movie with a lot more slower tone, where everybody's pretty much just discussing shit and talking and making deals and make it fucking interesting. Because I
Yeah,
will swear to God, I've never watched a movie where it involved with a lot of sit down talking, and it'd be 3.5 hours long, and I felt like I watched an hour and a half movie.
Yeah, and that also factors into like
That's
the
how
the
invested I was in the
builds.
story.
But the biggest thing out for me the most, and this is two things that really gets into me. Uh, Pacino's performance, this is his best in fucking years. And I actually, if even if the movie doesn't get nominated much for other awards, I still hope that he at least gets nominated for supporting actor because he fucking was on top of his game here. And
Yeah, because in this film, it being 3.5 hours, um, in the format it goes, it's pretty much him starting out as a regular guy meeting Joe Pesci. Of course, Joe Pesci's moving him up in ranks,
yeah,
and pretty much we don't see Joe Pesci for about an hour and a half
yeah,
because it becomes an Al Pacino movie where he ends up teaming up with Al Pacino to kind of help him out in Chicago and dealing with a lot of, and it goes into like political because this really happened during the pretty much the Kennedy slash Nixon ish type era.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
but it
then
does have very good noir feel to the film, which I enjoyed, and I thought that Martin Scorsese captured all the time periods perfectly
yeah,
because you got to think we're covering pretty much late 50s, mid to late 50s, then we get in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and eventually towards the end, we're kind of pretty much up to date up until the guy's real death, 90s and early 2000s.
yeah. And what I also appreciate too was the relationship it builds between Frank De Niro's character and Jimmy Hoffa, because the movie
Yeah.
really wants you let you to get pretty much on the vibe of these guys were pretty much like very close together and stuff. And
Yeah.
it builds a lot of great fucking tension when stuff goes down and stuff. And it
Yeah.
also touches on the emotional level too.
Yeah, because you got Joe Pesci, of course. He's playing. You got him and Robert De Niro, and they build up in their relationship, and then you get that huge with him and Al Pacino, and pretty much when you get to towards the end, you get the feel of like where he's left with no choice. He's got to pick one or the other. So
Yeah.
it's like choose he choose. And gangster films, I don't want unless you follow a lot of documentaries. A lot of times I don't know the true story with a lot of these films, which is plays good because I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm glad that I didn't know shit about this. So that played into effect. But I will say that yeah, the story just is you get drawn in pretty fucking quick.
Yeah, it never it I was never bored by it. Like there may have been times where I've had to stop for, other things going on, but I still was so invested with it. Toward the end, there's maybe like some things they could have maybe trimmed, well not really trimmed out, but like maybe could have made the pacing a little bit more, but overall it still used its time wisely. Now, if I have like any little small cons I do have with the movie, I will say that while it is great to see Harvey Keitel playing this character that was pretty much like the guy above Joe Pesci's character. That's kind of pretty
Yeah,
much like playing the upper boss. I did feel like his character was a little bit like, well, I don't want to say underused, but he wasn't given a whole lot compared to what I thought he
I
was.
would I would say that he's underused. Seeing at the beginning, he's actually over Joe Pesci, and then he goes missing, and Joe Pesci pretty much is now the leader.
Yeah,
Um, and now it's a pro con because this film had so much going on in real life, the true story that a lot of it's told in text what happens to the people. And I
yeah,
guess I missed the Harvey Keitel's text thing, what happened to him. But since he's a big deal in that in the beginning, I was, it felt like they just dropped him off a bit too quick.
yeah,
If there was a scene where somebody didn't get a text when they died, probably would have been better if we would have saw Harvey Keitel's actual death play a
yeah.
big role.
True,
Yeah,
but
and
I
the
get what the
rise of Joe Pesci taking
movie.
orders.
Yeah, I get what the
Yeah,
movie's going for, and there were a couple times where like they could have fleshed some things out just to kind of like give us more like to kind of like do things more in like spend more time with certain characters, like with Anna Paquin's the De Niro's daughter in the film, where I get
yeah,
her
because they do
presence.
that big
Presence was
thing
great.
where
Where it
they do it. in the film, which I actually praise, where the daughter is like seeing like shit that ain't right going on, and she don't know until she gets older, and she starts questioning is her dad is in the mob, and they focus so much on her only for to know that the relationship kind of had a fallout, and it
Hmm.
just that was it. And
Yeah.
but a thing I had a problem with, I felt like yes, there are things they could have cut out because there is like a running joke kind of like later on in the film that went on for a pretty long time. It was about uh the guy from Breaking Bad and him buying a fish.
Yeah. That was a
They kept
little.
talking about it like fucking a long time, and I felt like some of those scenes could have been shaved down. Um, Now the Robert De Niro part where we get to the final where he's pretty much old and he's at his pretty much his deathbed. He's fucking now in his 90s or whatever. But the climax kind of ends, and we still got about 40 minutes left in this movie, and pretty much it's a pro con for me because while I felt like it was taking fucking forever for the movie to end, I will say that I can forgive it because in a way it was kind of like a metaphor for Scorsese having to say goodbye because we're never going to see these people together again. So because of that, I felt like he wanted to do more of a homage to it's a dot they're old. I mean we probably gonna I mean I'd hate to say it, but most of these characters what 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s
Yeah.
almost. So how long do they really truly have left? So it's
True.
pretty much like while paying homage to the real the character who got old, died of old age, whatever he died from, and while at the same time, he's doing his own take where he's seems like he doesn't want to let go. Is what I'm trying to say.
Right. And I get what the movie was going for too, with pretty much what the real life Frank pretty much ended up becoming after the stuff that went down and everything. And I like the movie the way it showed a lot of the remorse on that. But
Yeah,
I can agree with you. It just did feel like it did kind of throw some of the pacing off because it was like they were trying to keep going when things were pretty much already done. But with that
yeah.
being said, though, with
He does feel remorse and he wants to be a family man. And again, that kind of was a pro a little bit because it takes me back to Blow. If you guys remember Blow with Johnny Depp, where he spent his whole life being, who he was and making money and selling drugs and becoming this big kingpin. It kind of resembled that where pretty much you're old and you have nothing left. Nobody visits him. Everybody's dead and gone. Kind of remind me of that movie a little bit towards the end.
yeah,
And it's a
but
sad ending. It is pretty sad. He chose that life, and then next he realizes in the end he's alone.
yeah. But overall, though, I still highly fucking love this movie a lot, and I I definitely is it definitely is one of the probably one of the best Netflix movies I've ever seen in my life, and it's basically not only a great triumphant closure for Scorsese and crew of what they've done
Yeah.
with as iconic icons in Hollywood, but also just it's great to see just a classic gangster film that honestly I feel like while it is compared more to Goodfellas and Casino, honestly I would make it like a great double feature with Once Upon a Time America, which in that film it deals with a very similar structure where you have De Niro pretty much playing going back from being old to younger again. So it kind of pretty much takes place like that if you look at it.
Yeah,
Um,
but I will say that it is it's a true end to an era that we
yeah,
probably won't that we're definitely not going to see again. And you know, this is definitely would work well with the collection. And this is like I said earlier, it's easily in his top 5 best movies, and it's going to be my top 10 of this year.
oh mine too. So with that being said, I'm going to give the movie a phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter.
I'm phenomenal grade and Film Freaks meter as well.
Fair enough. For those of you who have also seen The Irishman, let us know in the comments below what you thought about it. And if you like what you see here, you can feel free to like and subscribe to our channel and check out some other reviews here and on our website at filmfreaks.com. We'll be seeing you in our next review. We'll see you later.